deeply frustrated by his inability to shut down the Iran war. And I think that he worries greatly what it means for his political future and what it means for his reputation moving forward. What's happened here is that we had a memorandum of understanding, which we've talked about many times on the show, that was signed on June 17th. And the name of the game underneath the memorandum of understanding was to stop the fighting, to get a ceasefire, number one, and then number two, to open the strait. And then what we were going to do is we were going to negotiate over a whole slew of important issues, the nuclear issue being most prominent, but also things like sanctions, reparations, frozen assets, the question of who controlled the strait moving forward. Would the Iranians be allowed to exact tolls or fees? There were just all sorts of issues that were going to be negotiated once we got the ceasefire in place and once the strait was opened. But of course, the Trump administration, President Trump himself, foolishly walked away from the MOU. And the MOU has basically been relegated to the garbage can. And now what has happened this past weekend on 8 August, the Iranians put out a new series of demands. And they have basically said that every one of those issues that we were going to negotiate in the MOU or under the MOU, every one of those issues has to be settled up front. So that the United States has to pay reparations, right? The United States has to unfreeze the assets. The United States has to lift all sanctions even before the Iranians open the Strait of Hormuz. Just think about this. There's not going to be any negotiation at all on any of these many issues that are on the table. The Iranians are demanding that we concede on every single issue before they'll be willing to open the tolls. Willing to open the strait. This is really quite remarkable. I don't understand how President Trump can accept these demands. The other point that I would make to you that I don't think most people who are talking about this see is that the nuclear issue has basically been taken off the table. And President Trump has even talked about getting a deal to open the strait and walking away from the nuclear issue. You want to remember that for a long, long time, going back to the JCPOA, the nuclear issue vis-a-vis Iran has been the focus of our attention. If you look at the discourse now, if you look at the discourse surrounding the August 8th demands, the recent demands of the Iranian government, there's no discussion that I see of the nuclear issue. It's got pushed into the background. And you want to remember, we're now in a situation, given everything that's happened since February 28th, where you have real hardliners in charge in Iran. And the Iranians have a greater incentive than ever to acquire nuclear weapons. So we have a situation here where the nuclear issue has, in a very subtle way, been pushed aside in the various negotiations about what kind of deal will we reach to end this war. And at the same time, the incentives for Iran to get nuclear weapons are greater than ever. And at the same time, you have people who are running Iran now who are much more likely to want nuclear weapons than the people who were running that country on February 27th. So it's really quite striking where we are. And just one final point, the Iranians said yesterday, they basically believe they're going to have to wait until President Trump leaves office because he will not accept all of their new demands, which is that they cave on every issue before the strait be opened. The United States is not expected to cave by the Iranians, so they say the strait will be closed until the president leaves in January of 2029. This is a disastrous situation for the United States.
And here's what he said yesterday about the strait. This is remarkable. Our friend and colleague, Ambassador Chaz Freeman, says not only is none of this accurate, it's an indication of a serious defect in thinking that he would even say this. Chris, cut number one.
Well, it's open now. We're taking a lot of shit. It's open now. Look, the only one that has control of the Strait of Hormuz right now is the United States Navy. We have a blockade that's been infallible. It's a steel wall. And we let people in that we want to let in, and those people come in, and they've been coming in and they're going out. So it's actually open now. We do not let them go into Iran. They're not admitted into the Strait to go to Iran.
President Trump never admits defeat. He just doesn't admit defeat. He always wins. We're always in charge. And facts just don't matter. And the truth is that what he's saying is just dead wrong. And he fully recognizes that he or the United States does not control the Strait, that the Iranians control the Strait. And he's been desperate for months now to figure out a way to open the Strait. And huge amounts of attention have been paid to that issue. He's talked about it. His people talk about it. The problem is, as I just said, they can't open the Strait. And now the Iranians have put a series of demands on the Americans that have to be met before the Strait will be opened. And I don't see how President Trump can accept those demands. At the same time, I don't see how he can reject them, because he's got to open the Strait at some point in the not too distant future. But to do that will be extremely difficult, given those demands that the Iranians have placed on him.
I mean, are there any of his goals realistically within reach? The goals that he set forth when he started the war, whether he articulated them or Rubio did?
No, it's unequivocally clear that he has not achieved any of the four goals. Remember, there were four goals on the table.
Right.
One was that we were going to eliminate their nuclear enrichment capability. Number two, we were going to put an end to their long-range missile capability. Number three, we were going to reduce their support or eliminate their support of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, right? And then fourth, and I think most importantly, because I think the first three goals depended on achieving the fourth goal, we were going to get regime change. Well, we did not get regime change. If anything, what we got there were people in power who are now, the people who are in power are now more hardline than the people who were in power on February 27th. With regard to the nuclear enrichment issue, as I said, what's happened here is, if anything, the nuclear issue has been pushed into the background. And I don't see any chance in the foreseeable future that we're going to get a nuclear deal. So we lost, in my opinion, big time on that issue. And then there are all these other issues that have nothing to do with those four demands on which we've lost on. Our basing structure in the region has basically been wrecked. Our alliance structure in the region has been badly damaged. We've done great damage to the international economy, not as bad as most people expected, but nevertheless, so far it's been quite bad. The Chinese have benefited greatly at our expense from this crisis or this war in the Gulf. By the way, just to take this a step further, it's very important to emphasize that the United States is now putting out a new nuclear doctrine that emphasizes the employment of tactical nuclear weapons. You sort of scratch your head and you say, what's going on here? Why are we going back to emphasizing the use of tactical nuclear weapons? Well, the answer is actually quite clear. We're now emphasizing the use of tactical nuclear weapons because we have so severely run down our conventional forces between the Ukraine war and especially the Iran war, that if you think about ever fighting a war with China, we don't have the conventional assets to stay in the fight for very long at all. So unsurprisingly, what are we talking about doing? Employing nuclear weapons. Do you really want to do that? Wouldn't you much rather rely on conventional deterrence and keep nuclear deterrence in the background? Of course you would, but you can't do that because you've so thoroughly depleted your arsenal of conventional weapons. So unsurprisingly, we're now talking about relying more heavily in the future on nuclear weapons, and in particular, tactical nuclear weapons. This just shows you how much trouble we are now in as a result of this war in Iran, which we are going to lose. And by the way, we're going to lose the war in Ukraine as well. We are going to have two big losses on our record in short time.
Right. Add to all of that, we've lost the trust of the entire world. The entire world.
There's no question about that. I mean,
Were you surprised last question when Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly, could have done it in a phone call, publicly repudiated Trump's so-called disarmament agreement between Hamas and IDF?
No, not at all. I mean, the fact is that Prime Minister Netanyahu and virtually everybody in his government is deeply committed to creating a greater Israel that is basically comprised of Jewish citizens, Israeli Jews. And the last thing they want is a greater Israel that's populated with large numbers of Palestinians. So what they have been doing in Gaza, as we've discussed many, many times on this show, is executing a genocide that is all designed to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians from Gaza, to drive them out of Gaza. And if you look at all the pogroms that they're launching on the West Bank, it's very clear that they're trying to ethnically cleanse the West Bank as well. So the idea that the Israelis would agree to a deal that called for them to leave Gaza and in effect turn Gaza back over to the Palestinians, it's just unthinkable from an Israeli point of view. Not going to happen. There was no way that Netanyahu would ever accept that deal. And he fully understands that he had to make it clear to the Israeli public, because remember, there's election coming up. I think it's in October of this year inside of Israel, and Prime Minister Netanyahu is in political trouble. He had to make it clear to all Israelis that he was adamantly opposed to the deal that the Board of Peace and ultimately President Trump were pushing forward. So I think that's why he's been so public about it. But regardless of how public or private he's been in terms of dealing with this issue, the fact is no Israeli leader that I could think of is going to accept a deal that involves giving up Gaza or the West Bank.